Hello, I wanted to talk about idea generation and sort of the difference between what I do and what I teach, and maybe the academic treatment of it versus what your own experience with it is like. And it's sort of the confessional in a way, because the way I design things is in my mind for the most part. And I work it out in my mind, and I make a sketch here or there, I build it, try it out. When that fails, I tweak it, and I move forward with things. And I've designed a lot of things over my life. I didn't start teaching until I was 40, and prior to that I designed dozens of things, and I continue to do so. So I have a lot of experience in designing commercialized products and systems, and one of the things that happens is there's a textbook approach to idea generation or ideation, and that's to make all these ideation sketches. Never erase a mark, continue, sometimes a theme from a primitive form outward, sometimes it's just maniacal laying of ink onto paper to fill up every void, all these kind of things, and to make the ideation step sort of an artistic pursuit in its own right. Well, and I teach that. So for example, some places will require 100 ideation sketches. I don't require that many. I ask my students to do 10 usually, and there's a reason for that, and it's all rooted in something good. But I want to talk about how I actually design, or come up with ideas anyway, a bit. So it's outside the textbook, outside of the tradition perhaps, but well, in fact, let me just go right into that, and that is I work things out in my mind. 95% of my work is strictly in my mind. It's not sketching anything, it's not building anything, it's all working it out in my mind. And people have different abilities in that regard. Since I was very young, a teenager, and maybe younger, that's how I've designed things. And I ruminate over ideas, and I manipulate them in my mind, and I can do that sort of thing. And I think about these things never during office hours, but outside of the office hours, as far as true innovation. And anyway, then I certainly do sketch things, and then I have to fairly quickly build things, because things don't always look and act the same when you build them as when you're manipulating them in your mind. I don't go through a process in my real work of generating lots and lots and lots of ideas. Now there's a place for that, so I'll talk about that, but that's how I do it. It's almost all in my mind. So I don't find fertile soil in forced ideation, where you force a lot of sketches, because then it can become sort of the process of counting how many ideation sketches you made, rather than letting the processes manipulate in your mind. So the point of that is people handle things differently. Maybe some people have to draw things a lot and see them and have that dialogue with a sketch. But maybe some people are completely comfortable doing this all in their mind. And again, that's just as a confessional, that's my world. And that being said, so I just wanted to, in that way, give some assurance to those that do that sort of thing, that manipulating ideas in your mind is valid and useful and fun and powerful and really unconstrained. The flip side of that is ideation in a more traditional sense, and I'll tell you that works in a couple of ways that are beneficial. One is when you're working with groups, and which is really common. You're working with groups and you have to show your ideas, you can speak of them, but you do need some kind of visual platform to present ideas often, and that's really helpful, whether that's sketching or sculpting or whatever it might be. And the other is to force, I think anyway, at least if you're newer, is to force you into corners of thinking that you might not pursue otherwise. So I typically ask students to come up with this triad of thoughts, one being practical thoughts, the first things that come to your mind for solving a problem. The second is a beautiful portrayal of that, so your product has an element of the lore, so you're sort of maybe forfeiting some practical elements for beauty. And finally, to embrace fully complex, exotic, elaborate solutions, the things that separate the professionals from the amateurs. So people run away from things that move, they run away from things that have complex mechanisms that run away from a lot of things. So you really want to get into the lines then with that sort of thing. So I think that's useful. Like I said, in my teaching, again, I started teaching when I was 40, so I worked most of my career as a practicing designer and engineer, and even now that I teach, I still do consulting work and I still design things. I love designing things, but maybe when you're newer, it is helpful to be compelled to push those corners of idea generation, so there's a place for it. But I just wanted to, in this little snippet, share that I do it almost all in my head, and I have to build it quickly and fail quickly, and kind of work with that physical interface rather than a lot of sketches and working out this whole taxonomy of idea generation before I go to testing. So, and I'll kind of continue with that a bit in the form of the design thinking. You know, the idea is, the idea is popular now is a notion of empathy and then definition and then ideation, prototyping, testing. Well, in my world, that's not how it works. In my world, professional world, not teaching world, you have a problem you're trying to solve. That's the first step, is what is the problem you're trying to solve. And I realize defining exactly what goes into that problem is an issue, and I'm not minimizing that at all, because lack of problem definition is the leading cause of project failures. So, but normally you either identify or are presented a problem that you solve. And the empathizing sort of follows that. So what I think of as a sort of a more holistic, maybe, personal version of design thinking, for me, not textbookish, is to understand the environment you're working with. So who is the customer, who are the other stakeholders, and what is the financial environment? And understand that really well. And of course the problem definition is in there somewhere. And then empathizing is in there somewhere too. But it's sort of it's not really a linear thing where you I don't think, for me, where you're doing this kind of linear process. And that looks good, it kind of works in a school setting and so on, but humans are very capable of handling all kinds of information and juggling them and massaging them, and so are college students. So anyway, in other words, what's the environment you're working with? Both financial, the user-centric pursuit that you're endeavoring to achieve, and then the other stakeholders who are important in any design. And then it's ideation and testing, or prototyping, whatever you want to call it. That's a big box, and you put all your stuff in there and shake it up, and you come up with a reasonable design at the end of it. So the idea generation and the testing are so integral, I wouldn't even bother separating them. The idea of taking ideas in 2 dimensions or something like that, and then refining them, getting a prototype, and then testing them. Well, that hardly ever works unless you're designing something very simple. If you're designing, flower pots and water bottles and things like that, you can maybe do that sort of thing. But with things that are more complicated, as I mentioned earlier, you're working stuff out in your mind, and you're testing things out, and you're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and then you come up with a good design. And of course, that works well for the individual or for the product. And I just think that's a useful way to think of design thinking. And then, of course, you go to engineering and manufacture, which is the next step, and there's dialogue back and forth there as well from the ideation step. But it's sort of, I would argue, this notion of understanding the environment holistically, idea generation, prototyping, testing as being one box that you work in sort of the chaotic way, not chaotic, wrong use of word, but it's sort of the holistic way. And then you engineer it, which is really important, getting the details worked out, the material specs, the tolerances, the dimensions, all the all the little things, big things that make items work in practice. And then you manufacture them, and of course you're talking to manufacturing all the time. And anyway, so this is sort of the confessional one-shot video on how I design versus textbook. And you've got your own wonderful way of designing things that you want to embrace. Take what's good from design schools, discard what's not good, and really understand your own heart and your own way of doing things. Thank you.